Please welcome our panel. It's a duo. Human in the loop and high-quality data are catalysts in ML and AI, with Beata Kouchnir from Glassdoor, Anna Bethke from Salesforce, and moderated by 𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗲 from 𝗁𝗁𝗁𝗁.
Welcome, Anna and Beata, to the panel, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Let's start with the trend that's happening in the industry. As we all know that we are shifting from a very model-centric approach to data-centric approach in all of AI. And both of you are in the middle of this transformation in your respective companies. So how are you using humans in the loop to improve the quality of the data and ultimately the performance of the models? Beata, can you kick us off?
Of course, thank you. Yes, so we use currently human in the loop most heavily in data labeling, so to prepare training data for models. And since we're using a lot of deep learning models, obviously those require a lot of data even to fine tune. So that's where we mostly have currently human in the loop, but we're looking at also engaging human in the loop at different, at all stages of the model lifecycle, including evaluation, including kind of post-production monitoring, drift detection, that sort of thing.
Interesting. And how about you, Anna? What do you see?
Yeah, no, definitely both in terms of training the model as well as looking at the performance of the model. One of the things that I find really interesting is that a lot of these automatic performance metrics don't necessarily assess the model performance for their actual utility. This is especially true in like natural language processing. So there's performance metrics like BLEU or ROGUE, which are used to check how many words in the predicted response match the training data. But study after study have shown that these metrics can be actually inversely correlated with human-rated readability and usefulness, which is what you actually want at the end of the day. So it's important to have people look at these like predictions before you deploy them out as well.
Very interesting. And have you seen any like human in the loop areas of investment? For example, which parts of the whole life cycle do you see humans in the loop at this stage from your experience? Can you speak to that a little bit? I'll start with Anna.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the investments that we've been making heavily is around model transparency. So basically looking at what is the model actually doing and why, especially if we're having these deep learning models, you want to be able to tell, okay, this image, it thinks that there is a dog in here versus a cat. Okay, well, where does it think this dog is? Where are the areas that it's attending to? Where are the areas of this image that it's not? And this can also be done with NLP, with categorical data, etc. And the more that we're able to actually like invest in these through like interactive model cards or through some of the transparency techniques that some of our researchers have put into open source packages through like OmniXAI, it can really help to then let a human dig into that performance, dig into like figuring out, okay, well, is it the model? Is it the training data that I can then go back and correct? Or is it, I don't know what the third thing would be, but one of those two, yeah. What is the actual issue going on?
Thank you. And Beata, from your experience, where do you see the focus of the investment of human in the loop?
I think the focus for us is to actually shifting more towards kind of, I wouldn't say so much subject matter expertise, but pretty close to that. So just more sophisticated, more skilled employees who, because the data that we have to annotate, that we have to label is actually very, very complex, and it requires an understanding of a business context that usually, used to be like, you have a bunch of data, you kind of send it to a third party to label, you get it back, you train a model with it. That has been like less and less successful for us. So instead of just kind of sending it off, getting it back, we're bringing it more and more in-house.
That's interesting. The business context remains such a critical capability that the people who are interacting with the data have to have, and missing that is pretty hard. So given that, when do you think you can take humans out of the loop? What are the risks of doing that? And just if you could speak to that, Beata, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I don't think that we can take humans out of the loop because essentially there's always humans in the loop. Like if humans are consuming the model, right? Like if you're having a customer facing model and we're not in, I don't think anybody would claim that their model makes perfect predictions every single time, right? So, and there's always a sort of cost and a damage when you have a customer facing model and that's making incorrect predictions. So I consider, I see the role shifting a little bit, as I said before, to kind of more sophistication, maybe more post-production, less kind of pre-training so much. But I don't think like it's ever, maybe I'll eat my words at some point, but the way the current state of AI we have now, I don't believe that it's possible to take the humans out of the loop without the performance of the model suffering.
Okay, we have the gauntlet down. She's going to eat the words later. But Anna, how about you? What's your take on this? Can we take humans out of the loop?
I don't think so. Not entirely. I agree with Beata. There's always a room for a human to do some type of critical thinking, some type of processing that the AI algorithms just simply can't handle at this time. And even when you look at the definition of a fully, autonomous system, quote unquote, there's always a human that has oversight into that system so that they're able to correct issues that occur either right before they happen, hopefully, but definitely afterwards, trying to determine, okay, well, why did our algorithm perform this way? Why did our autonomous robot or vehicle or whatever do this often, very dangerous thing at the end of the day? So it's definitely having the human in the loop at some point is required. And it's really interesting and challenging to determine what can be made autonomous and what do you need a person to do? And often, that changes over the life cycle of a task. You might have a person being much more involved in the data labeling process, in the data quality checks, in the performance monitoring. And then over time, as your AI sort of proves itself, you might be able to wean the person off of that task. But there's always going to be somebody there, someone that is accountable for what the AI is doing.
And the converse is also true that we obviously want to remove as much of automation, repetitive work that humans should not be doing. So there is a case for humans to be taken out of several AI processes. Can you speak to when it does make sense for humans to be removed, and if so, how do you balance that participation versus removal of the humans from the process? Do you have any thoughts on either some example where you think you need to have the humans in it, or versus definitely out of the loop, either way?
I think for me, I always remember what my advisor professor, Missy Cummings, said, which is there's these 3 Ds. So automation is good for the dull, the dirty, and dangerous tasks. Tasks that require reasoning, cognitive processing, creativity even, aren't as great for AI. So if let's say we have generative text and images, the AI can create many examples, but a human needs to be there to choose the best one to use, because sometimes they could look or feel off. They just aren't appropriate, or they could have content in them that is really harmful, either because it's biased or because it has harmful speech or imagery in it.
Yeah. And Beata, your thoughts on this question?
My thoughts are, as we're moving more towards approaches like few-shot learning and zero-shot learning that mimic a little more how humans learn, right? Because humans can learn from very few examples. They don't need thousands or millions of examples. So then the quantity of the labeled data that we need is reduced, or the dependency on that. And therefore, it's not somebody spending weeks labeling data, but they might spend a couple of hours providing really high quality data. And then once we train the model, they move on to other tasks. So it's just a lot less monotonous for the human in the loop. They're not repeating the same task over and over, but rather they have a set of tasks that they're all supposed to be really good at, which is actually a very tall ask for them as well. And then, rotate through them.
Interesting observations. What I'm hearing is that AI and ML automation can be relegated to dull, dirty, and dangerous tasks and the monotonous ones. So fair enough. So let's look at humans in the loop in the next 2 to 3 year cycle. Now, it's always dangerous to start making predictions in a fast-moving field, particularly AI and ML. And a lot of us are even promising to eat words. But let that be the case. Let's look at what do you see as a change that you forecast of the role of humans in the loop over the next 2 to 3 years. Start with you, Beata.
So like I said before, it's just the job requirements are going to get a lot harder than they were before. And while you're going to need fewer humans in loop, the humans that you do have are just going to need to wear so many hats. And also really what we're noticing with our particular human in the loop team, they need to lean really heavily into learning, machine learning and AI, because it's not like you can completely say, okay, this is a black box, just do this task, and then don't worry what happens to the data later, don't worry what happens to it later. We're now working super closely at Glassdoor with our human in the loop team. It's a team actually that reports into me, which is usually not the case in most organizations, that the human in the loop team also reports to the ML director. But just because we work together on a daily basis, we have Slack channels, we're all in the same meeting. So it's just this very close coupling of the ML scientist or ML engineer and the human in the loop.
And Anna, your thoughts on changes in the next 2 to 3 years of the human's role?
Yeah, I totally echo the thought that the humans that are in the loop are going to be performing higher tasks and also need additional training in order to do this and need to know what the AI is really doing. So I love examples. And one of my favorites is humanitarian OpenStreetMaps. They've been using volunteers to hand mark map objects like streets, rivers, bridges, etc. for years to ensure that all areas of the world, and not just, those in like first or second world countries, are mapped. And by mapping the world, this allows like better first response in case of disaster, etc. But now like they're utilizing AI that's trained on really high quality hand labeled data to be able to predict objects in new places. And so the volunteers, instead of clicking, okay, these are the points that are on this road, are able to confirm if an AI predicted road really is present, provide corrections if necessary, et cetera. And that really dramatically reduces the time to map an area. But these volunteers also need to know, okay, well, what is the AI doing? How is it trained? Is like the base imagery the same, et cetera? And they're basically now doing a QA check on the AI to get these labeled data.
Interesting. So the jobs are getting harder for the humans in a certain way, cognitively and otherwise.
Yeah.
And as you would expect, it's a virtuous cycle. AI does more, and we are expecting humans to do more as well. An interesting observation, Beata, that the importance of the work to be done by humans is so critical that the team is working with you, the data engineering teams and so forth, rather than relegated to some low-level tasks, etc. Let's move on. As you know, the industry is moving slowly towards from, I would say, AI applications in test and R&D mode to AI applications in production, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, companies such as Salesforce and Glassdoor are a little further ahead than many of the others in the industry who might be early in figuring out where to add humans in the process, right? So you've been further down the journey. What tips would you share with your peers, in ML data scientists and engineers on how to take that journey early on when they're just starting from model development to actually production readiness? And how would you advise them to bring in humans in the middle to improve data quality or model performance? Right. I'll start with you, Beata. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that I think about it is that, human in the loop very often tends to be an afterthought, especially companies just starting out with the machine learning lifecycle. So usually what happens is, the ML team, without even consulting human in the loop team, will design the whole lifecycle, and then they'll be like, oh yeah, we need some labeled data. Let's take care of that, right? So which is, eventually like you'll hit a snag where you're like, okay, we didn't foresee this, we didn't design for this, what do we do now? And so it's really important to have human in loop part of the design. So, as you're doing kind of your life cycle or your workflow and sketching it out ideally in some form like lucid chart, like a flow chart, those modules need to be in there, right? And at every step of the way of the life cycle that you're going to need it. And if you realize in the beginning, like you don't actually know, or you don't know where you're going to get those resources, or you don't know exactly what they're doing, you need to stop and figure that out, or at least like figure that out to, as much as possible and before you just plunge into this whole machine learning process.
Interesting. Anna, your comments?
The biggest advice I'd have to give is that enterprises should expect that AI will make mistakes at some point and test for these using people in the loop, and that people should be added at all stage of the model development. One of the things that we especially like to use humans in the loop for is AI red teaming. So basically trying out edge cases and adversarial attacks to see what the AI does. And this also, it's often really a lot of fun, but you can think of a dozen or so cases, and then based on the result, create more, basically making sure that you're not deploying AI that will behave poorly to the best of your abilities.
Very interesting. So what I'm hearing both of you comment on is that make human in the loop as a strategic guidance up front. Don't make it an afterthought, and go so far as to actually even prepare for some failures of AI and make sure that you're ready to address those rather than hope that everything will go well in first pass. That's interesting, I think, based on your operational experiences. So let's drill down on a comment that both of you had made earlier about as AI becomes fully commercialized, the job requirements become harder, right? So I'm curious about, during this commercialization process, what are the human skills needed for those who are in the loop? And can you speak to a few skills that you anticipate that will be more in demand than today, perhaps, for the folks who are actually in the loop of this work? Anna, your thoughts first?
I definitely agree with Beata that, the people that are creating the data sets, that are verifying if the model is performing well, need to know more and more about these algorithms. So like additional training and really thoughtful training is necessary so that we enable our humans in the loop to perform as well as they can, as well as to understand what their place in this process to the greatest degree possible. So being able to look and see if these results are interesting, if they're useful, if they're effective, not just if it's accurate based on, the training data, et cetera.
Makes sense. Beata?
Yeah, and I would add to that also they need to be subject matter experts or, close to subject matter experts of the business that, the models are modeling, right? And the customers that they're serving. So if you have, a medical image ML model, then obviously you need, experts to evaluate it. Even if it's something like less, expertise, like, for example, Glassdoor, which is user-generated reviews of employers and of the interview process. It needs to be somebody who's kind of savvy enough to understand how those interviews work and what the terminology and what the jargon means. They need to be able to, for example, evaluation, we have automatic evaluation, like, for example, a confusion matrix for a classification model. But what we do a lot is if we see, okay, there's one or two or three classes that are just not performing well, then we need our humans in the loop to review those classes and potentially identify some patterns of what it is that's tripping up the model. So it is, in a way, even a broader range of skills than an ML scientist or engineer, where they have more of a depth of skills, whereas human in loop is more and more kind of needs to be, I guess I'm not a fan of the term generalist, but that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah. So interesting combination, what I'm hearing you say, is of some domain knowledge plus enough general knowledge to continue to evolve. That sounds very much like a general human skill that we can't short circuit ever, right? So let's turn to the question of AI workflows and the complexity, and particularly as more and more enterprises have to partner with various folks who are bringing humans in the middle, lots of ethical issues come up. And I would start with you, Anna, as to what do you think are the key ethical issues that the companies and their human in the middle partners need to be aware of? And touch upon what could be done to address it.
No, totally. I think a lot of it boils down to having a human-centric approach to humans in the loop. So ensuring that all of the people that are performing these tasks are properly compensated for their time, both monetarily as well as for personal or professional growth. So there's some common things that we can all do, such as like making sure we're paying a minimum at minimum paying a living wage. Sorry about that. And all too often, like our companies have outsourced human in the loop tasks so that we are able to like lower budgets, and that's not necessarily appropriate for a lot of the reasons Beata also mentioned, of making sure that there are subject matter expertise as well as the knowledge about the AI. But then on the other side too, is people want to be intellectually stimulated in general, not just creating like bounding boxes around objects all day. And then the last thing that I want to say is that we don't generally want to be surveilled either. And I've been really happy in the last couple of weeks that a number of human rights organizations and governments have stated that it like forced webcam monitoring violates privacy and human rights conventions. So these are no longer going to be the norm or allowable, which is great for the people working in these types of tasks. Oh, and one more thing. Sorry, I have one, is that if there are humans in the loop working on toxic or hate speech or otherwise anything that's potentially harmful, there needs to be additional actions to preserve the mental well-being of these workers. So providing a diversity of tasks, free counseling, frequent unmonitored breaks, things like this could be really, really helpful for the person who is having to look at this like horrid content all day.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Beata, anything quickly you want to add to that before we move to the Q&A?
I was going to say the same thing, honestly, just to ensure mental well-being, because some of the content that humans review can be very disturbing, and just not to just take it for granted that that's what they do all day, but understand that that's kind of there's a human cost that's associated with that, and to take care of the humans that are doing the work.
So well said. Bringing and maintaining human dignity for the folks who are in the middle of this very challenging work. So let's take two questions right now. I can see that a couple of questions coming in. First, for Beata. Beata, Glassdoor, what are the biggest challenges to incorporating human in the loop at Glassdoor?
The biggest challenge for me was actually convincing our leadership that we need human in the loop, because our CTO and our chief product officer were not even aware. So they have like a when people have a basic understanding of ML, but they are not ML experts, they truly don't appreciate the need for human in the loop and the data. So just the fact that, yes, we need human in the loop, that's an investment just as much like we need GPUs, like we need the compute resources, like that's a non-negotiable. We can't train a model without it, just for the same reason we can't also do it without a human in the loop. And that took quite a few conversations, on my end to raise awareness about that and to convince it and then get the resources for that.
Fascinating. We need compute resources and human compute resources, cloud compute and human compute. Okay. And a question for you on Salesforce. Your bio mentions that you help teams assess and mitigate bias. How is human in the loop being utilized to help detect and, more importantly, mitigate the model bias?
Yeah, a big part comes around how we source and label the data. So making sure that there are representative people that are collecting and labeling data, that they are the subject matter experts necessary, as well as, if it's textual data or even data that could be different based on cultures, that you are from the area that this data is coming from. So if I'm labeling images of soap, okay, well, what are the images of soap that I'm used to might be different than somebody else. And this has been shown in some of the ImageNet data set, for instance. So things like that are big, but then also the transparency tools that I mentioned earlier are really big in making sure that the models aren't producing biased or non-representative data samples. So what is my model actually attending to when it's making this prediction can really help to start to ferret out some of this bias.
Indeed, very interesting. That's all the time we have today for the panel discussion. Thank you so much, Anna and Beata, for your comments. Short, power-packed, full of wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Anurag.
Thank you as well.